For my project, I decided to interview someone that was a teenager during the 1960s, as this was an era that was very politically charged. Seeing the assassination of a president that was very influential with younger people during the time period in John F. Kennedy. We had they had the moon landing and this was a very impactful social event. And finally, during this time period, there was also the civil rights movement, which, as talked about in the interview, not only impacted the various reforms that were made, but also impacted every single person on a more personal level, whether they were white, due to the fact that they now had to had to live with people of a different race. And as always, African Americans saw their daily life change as now they were involved in as they were now integrating, I guess you can say, with white Americans. Also, it was during this time period that Vietnam began to become a more serious issue for the country, as um, it was beginning to lose support, which it can be seen with various reactionary protests in colleges by students, as they were done with the lives that were being lost. Uh, I'm going to begin the interview by just getting a nice little background on my interviewee, which is the grandfather of a close friend to mine and someone that I always love interacting with, due to the fact that they always have something interesting to say about American history, as I don't really have parents or grandparents that were around America during much of the 60s through the 90s. So it's always nice to get a view of someone else, the
Well, let's see, I graduated from high school in 1963. I was 17 when I graduated, so the 60s. So I was like, 15 years old through 25. They were a fun time. There was a lot going on. Unfortunately, you had Vietnam going on, and you had the drug culture that was starting right about the same time. Uh, and it was, what did they call it? They called it like the me generation, I guess, but there was a lot of stuff going on, promiscuous activity, and everybody was like, do what you want, that kind of stuff. Yeah, well, it's hard to tell about his presidency because he was not that long into his presidency. But I think that the, the sense of security was heightened after that happened. It had been so long since a president had been assassinated that I think security got pretty lax. So they did, in fact, tighten up on that for the government officials. Well, honestly, no, I did not. But I was so busy in my life doing what I was doing that I didn't pay much attention to it as a younger person. Young people then were not nearly as conscious of civil rights issues as they are today. I mean, yeah, everybody was busy doing their own life and didn't pay that much attention to it. I think it depended upon where you were, what city in the country. There were still there were still a lot of southern bigotry. Of course, that's where it happened, and it happened in the South. But in Philadelphia and larger East Coast cities, uh, no, there weren't that many demonstrations. There were some riots here and there, but nothing of any real consequence. It, not his death, but his work did change people's idea of discrimination, and people who never really thought about it were forced to think about it. So yeah, it opened the consciousness of most of the U.S. citizens. Well, the first thing that I can remember, and it was a negative on my part, was the busing of students. They would take students from your school, let's say, and bus you down to Center City, Philadelphia, and put you in a school that was primarily black. And the black children that were down there, they would move and bring up here. which I felt was really grossly unfair. But that's the way that was their effort to make it even by numbers. You know, if the school had 1,200 kids and if they wanted 600 black kids, 600 white kids, which really wasn't the way to go about it, and has since changed. There was, I think, some racial equality came from it, where again, people's level of consciousness was raised again because of it, you know? And after the fact as well. Let's see, when would that have been? It would have been in the early 70s, when I was in the Marines doing our 2 weeks summer encampment. We decided, a group of us, to not stay on the base and sleep in tents, so we got motel rooms. And all of us went over. At first it was just me and a couple of other guys went over, and we checked in, and then more decided to come over. One guy was black, and I thought the owner of the motel was going to have a heart attack when he saw a black guy. He wanted us to get rid of him, and we refused to. And he knew he couldn't force us to, you know, out. So that was a very graphic first-hand experience in how people can be. And I think, again, North versus South, the people in the North were more accepting, the people in the South were less accepting, but have actually, I think in some ways, in recent years, have come around more than the Northerners have. I don't know if it was a result of the Civil Rights Act, but yeah, back in the early 60s, there were very few black, primarily baseball players, because that was the sport of choice back then.
Yeah.
But then you started to see more sports figures, starting in baseball and then into football and, of course, basketball.